Welcome back to Cheddar, everyone. The clock is ticking for airlines. Many are set to lay off thousands of employees once a federal aid stipulation hits the cutoff date in only 1 month. And just yesterday, 3 big-name airlines dropped change fees in a bid to get passengers back on board. Joining us now is Bryan Del Monte, who is the president of the Aviation Agency. Bryan, great to have you here with us today, and thanks for taking the time. What is your proposal for how to save the air travel industry?
I don't know that I have a proposal. The challenge, I think, for the aviation industry is really this, that demand has fallen, but not because of anything that the airlines themselves can control. So normally in an economic, downfall, they would reduce prices, they would change their capacities, they would do all these things that they're very familiar with doing. But that isn't why people aren't flying right now. And so, lowering prices, changing capacity, part of the challenge I think we have to decide if we're going to provide more bailout money is what's the future look like for the airlines over the next 2 years, and what role, if any, does government play in that?
And what do you think that future does look like over the next 2 years? And does government take a larger stake in the success of airlines?
It certainly could. That hasn't been historically our model. I mean, essentially, we would have to contemplate going back to completely regulating the industry if we're going to carry, the industry for months or years. I mean, we gave the major carriers essentially $25 billion. We thought this was essentially going to be like a thunderstorm that was going to be over quickly. But here we are in September, flight levels haven't returned. What does that future look like? There are just some fundamental model issues of air travel that are at odds with containing a pandemic.
Right.
And so, what are we going to do there? We can subsidize it, but I push back on this notion of we got to give them all this money or air travel is going to cease to exist. Bankruptcy used to be a feature of air travel, or rather airline industry, all the time. Bankruptcy doesn't obliterate these assets. The airports are still going to be there. The planes are still going to be there. Someone's going to buy those assets. Someone's going to make a go of it. And some degree of consolidation is necessary. So we'll have to see where it goes.
So the last major consolidation that we saw was back in 2013 between American Airlines and U.S. Airways, correct me if I'm wrong. And as of right now, we see a whole different type of industry, whether that's the type of aircrafts that they're using, the number of travelers, and ultimately right now, as you have kind of the most profit driving part of that passenger consortium out of the equation, with business travelers not traveling at the same rate as before, the focus has shifted towards how can we appease some of the vacation travelers, these households that are looking for deals. And the fee waivers are one of the things that have come into discussion. Will that be enough in the interim period for airlines?
I don't think so. Look, the fee waiver stories are relatively interesting, right? They all have this kind of the same subtext of those, United's getting rid of its fees, good, and just the traveling public's just mad, right? Well, because the standard of being excited in customer service on most commercial air travel is, ooh, I got the entire soda can, with my snack. There's a lot of ill will. There's a lot of neglected branding. There's a lot of challenges from a public relations standpoint. Ask yourself why they cut those fees. Okay. Everyone's focusing on the fee cut, but nobody talks about why the fees were there to begin with. They were there to reduce revenue dilution of the airlines. That's why they charge you on the bags. That's why they charge you on the change fees. That's why they charge all these fees. It was exceptionally profitable for them because their algorithms and everything could really figure out how to squeeze every last dollar and make sure that plane left full when the door closed. Those models don't work with coronavirus. And that's why for them, they're like, hey, we can give this up. It's a good PR bit. People might like us again. We're trying to get a bailout. But understand, I mean, they made $3 billion off the change fees alone. And so if they're giving that up, they're giving it up in some hope of, we got to get people to fly again. We got to
Yeah.
reduce the friction.
And
And since there's no revenue to dilute at the moment, it's not a big concession on their part.
And Brian, I want to kind of summon one of the president's tweets as well that he put up previously when the airlines needed billions of dollars, and they got the first wave to come through, saying that the United States will be powerfully supporting those industries like airlines and others that are particularly affected by and the coronavirus. He says something different in his tweet that I won't repeat. But ultimately, how will we? Are we seeing movement towards another powerful deal, as the president put it at the outset of the pandemic? Do you believe that there will be another stimulus deal for the airlines that will come in at the particular size and scale that the president had preached at the beginning of the pandemic?
I would be pretty surprised if that's how it panned out. I get the impression, I'm not as close to Congress as I used to be back in my days of living in DC and working at the Pentagon. But I don't think there's a lot of thirst to give the airlines tons and tons of money. I think they would have some questions to answer as to why they took the grants and largely not the loans, and why, despite giving them this money, the sword of Damocles is going to fall and all these people are going to get fired at the end of the month. And the other issue that they'd have to resolve is if we're going to give them money, and I'm not against giving these industries money. There is a benefit that the nation gets, and aviation is the backbone of modern society. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's as essential as electricity and clean water and everything else. So, but if we're going to give them this money, to what end? And what's going to happen? And what is that industry going to look like? Those are some pretty difficult problems to solve in a highly charged political environment.
Absolutely. Bryan Del Monte, who is the president of the Aviation Agency, joining us today. Brian, we appreciate the time. All right, guys, and coming up on the other side of this quick break, presidential polling pitfalls, potentially. Why voters should take recent polling numbers with a grain of salt and what it can mean for the November election.